Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. So nice to see the mausoleum filled up with live bodies, isn't it? Yes. This is an event that we have for the Lehighton Area Heritage Alliance. It's the closest we can come to a historical society in Lehighton. We are trying to raise money for a heritage center at some point in time. We started this event in 2016 with a cemetery walk during the sesquicentennial, the 150th birthday of Lehighton. We've continued it ever since, but we found out that cemetery walks, well, it can be sunny, it can be rainy, it can be hot, it can be cold, and it can be windy. Try standing out there in a really, really hard wind and trying to hold your page and read it. We started Songs and Stories in the Mausoleum, where I do stories and Dave does marvelous music, and we know why everybody's here, Dave's music. So we started that, and then we decided we would continue it. There are some people that do like to walk around and look at the graves. So we're kind of combining them. We have the event in here. That way it can be windy, it can be rainy, it can be cold, sunny, hot, or whatever, and we're in here. Afterwards, this is the first time we're doing this, we have the grave sites marked. So if you're so inclined to walk around and look at them, we can point them out. Because there's only one that you can't see from here, but the other three you can see. So, and then I have a surprise story that I'm popping in partway of somebody who's not buried here in Lehighton, but it's a significant story that I think we really should tell. So, before we get into our extraordinary stories, how about some extraordinary music?
So we're looking at extraordinary stories of ordinary people, and I was thinking about extraordinary, what you'll hear from my end of this today will be extraordinary music, either songs or artists or musicians. And we're going to go way back to the 16th century, the end of the 16th century, and it's a song called Kemp's Jig, and normally you would say, oh, okay, it's a jig. That's nice. But this was by Will Kemp, and he was a contemporary of Shakespeare. And he was a comic actor. He performed in Elizabethan, the Globe Theater, and he was a guy that wanted to do publicity stunts. He wanted to do something really different. Imagine in 1599 in London what the roads are like. And he said, I'm going to make a little money on this too. We'll have a wager. He liked it bad. And he said, I could dance from here, from London, all the way to Norwich, which was at least 100 miles. I'm going to do this. So, okay, he's going to dance. So he invested some money in himself, bet on himself, and had a piper and a drummer accompany him, a musician, so he would do this jig, later called Kemp's Jig. And he also had a referee along to make sure, because there was a lot of money involved in this time, a lot of money with this. So he had a referee. So I'll tell you the outcome right now. He did accomplish it. It took him 9 days of dancing, not all at one stretch. It took about a month, but he did, and he was rich. Afterwards, 1600, and in 1603 he died. So this was his claim to fame. And the tune was discovered 400 years later, or whatever, in a manuscript for lute. So this is a mandolin, so it's about as close as I could get. So here's Kemp's Jig. this guy is dancing, this guy is going to this, so I'm playing that breakneck speed. And again, what you'll hear from me today, and I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I think one of the father of American song would have been our Pennsylvania-born Stephen Collins Foster, who was born July 4th of 1826 and died January 13th, 1864. He wrote and composed more than 200 songs. Some of his famous compositions were "Oh Susanna," "Angelina Baker," "Camptown Races." Old folks at home, "Hard Times Come Again," the more. Some of these songs you'll hear from me later today. "Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair" and "Beautiful Dreamer." But one of my favorite songs that he did was called the Glendy Burke. And it was a song that talked about Glendy Burke was the 29th mayor of New Orleans. And it was a paddleboat, a steamship on the Mississippi. And he spent some time on that with his brother. So this is called the Glendy Burke. Glendy Burke was a mighty fast boat, a mighty fine captain too. He sits up there on the hurricane deck and he keeps his eye on the crew. But then stay here cause the work's too hard. Have to leave this town. I'll take my nuts and tote them on my back when the Glendy Burke comes down. Let's go to Louisiana. I'm bound to leave this town. I'll take my nuts and tote them on my back when the Glendy Burke comes down. Glendy Burke and a funny old crew, they sing the spoken song. They burn the pitch and the pine knot too, and they shore the boat along. When the smoke goes up, the engine roars, and the wheels go round and round. And fare thee well, I'll take a little ride. The Glendy Burke comes down. It's Beau, Louisiana. I'm bound to leave this town. I'll take my nuts and throw them on my back when the Glendy Burke comes down. In the wind and the storm, work all day in the rain, and I find myself on the levee dock, New Orleans again. Gonna make me mow in the hayfield here, tote the bucket and pail. I'll go back to work and the sugar and the cane, where they cold as hot on the bay. And it's Beau, Louisiana. I'm bound to leave this town. I'll take my guns and tote them on my back when the Glendy Burke comes down. And it's Beau, Louisiana. I'm bound to leave this town. I'll take my guns and tote them on my back when the Glendy Burke comes down.
Susanne Louise Eller on December 4th, 1722 in Buttingen in the Wetteravia region of Germany. Her father, Johann Eller, died prior to her birth, and when her mother remarried, she was raised until the age of 7 in a home dominated by a coarse stepfather. The Buttingen rulers then handed her over to another couple, the Schuberts, who raised her until she was 18. During that period, she became familiar with the Moravians, whom she developed a strong kinship. She would have liked to join them, but her master would not let her go. In 1743, at the age of 21, she returned to visit to her mother, and eventually was freed to follow her desire to join the Moravian congregation. In that same year, Susanne married Georg Partsch, and with other members of the congregation, she set off from Marienborn for a new life in Pennsylvania. Susanne and Georg arrived safely in Bethlehem on December 6, 1743, and 4 weeks later they moved to Nazareth, where they lived for 12 years. On November 18, 1755, Susanne was asked by the Brethren Economy to relocate to Nottingham, located on the Mahoney. That's what they called it back then, not the Mahoney Creek, they called it the Mahoney. That's where she was to serve as cook. On November 24th, less than a week after arriving, Indians attacked the house in which she lived with other members of the Brethren. She and another member escaped by retreating to an upper floor, which they dropped unnoticed, and they ran to the nearby woods. She watched as the Indians ran from house to house with firebrands and set them all alight. She eventually made her way to the nearby river, where she hid through the night in a hollow log. The next morning, by that time nearly frozen, Susanne was found by a group of soldiers who brought her back to the burnt-out settlement, where she fainted at the sight of the charred bodies. Upon recovering, Susanne asked the soldiers to help get her back to Bethlehem. And as they were on their way, she was surprised to be reunited with her husband and brother Sturgis, another member of the congregation, both of whom she thought had been killed. They eventually completed the return trip to Bethlehem, where she and her husband remained for most of the next 10 years. Georg Partsch died in 1765, leaving Susanne with a family of 6 children. She continued on with the congregation in various roles until February 1st, 1795, when she quietly fell into eternal sleep at the age of 73. What makes the story of Susanne Partsch so compelling is that when she lived in a significant period, it was Lehighton's history. It was a time when Moravian missionaries were not always welcomed by the indigenous tribes. However, there were exceptions. T.D. Uscombe, known as the King of the Delawares, came to Nottingham in 1749 and embraced the Christian faith. He was later baptized and given the name Gideon. And of course, the story of Ben Franklin's visit to the area is intimately tied with Nottingham massacre. To protect the settlers from further depredations by the Indians, he built a line of forts, including Fort Allen in the area of Weisport. And it is said that Franklin celebrated his 50th birthday at Uplinger's Tavern near Little Gap. And in an ironic twist, another Nottingham massacre took place on March 8, 1782 in Tuscarawas County, Ohio. However, in Ohio, it was the colonial militia who took the lives of 96 Indians, many of whom were innocent women and children. And another historic tidbit. The young man who encouraged Susanne to jump from the upper floor window during the Indian attack, thereby saving both their lives, was Joseph Sturgis. He was a friend of her husband, Georg, and he went on to become a potter and a successful business owner. He later moved to another Moravian community in Lidditz, where he built a stately home in 1782, and his grandson founded the first commercial pretzel bakery in the United States. And the name Sturgis is synonymous with quality pretzels to this very day. These events took place in the early days of our country, and they are tidbits of history that are remembered only when stories such as that of Susanne Partsch are told. Thank you. This is not in Hutton. This is what the settlement looked like down by what we call the Mahoning Creek, and they call the Mahoney. And this is Bethlehem. So you can see Bethlehem was quite the city compared to Nottingham.
Go back a little bit to the music of the colonial era. Music included ballads and dance tunes and folk song parodies, songs and minuets and sonatas, but probably the most popular of the ballads and the songs were the tavern songs. And when Ben Franklin went to that tavern for his 50th birthday in Wind Gap, maybe he would have heard or sung this song. It's called Old Rosin and Beau. I've traveled all over this world, now to another highway. I know the good quarters are waiting. Welcome home.
Rosin to Beau. To welcome old Rosin to Beau. To welcome old Rosin to Beau. The good quarters are waiting. Welcome old Rosin to Beau. Laid out on that counter, voice you will hear from me, sitting down the hogshead of whiskey, drink with old Rosin to Beau. To drink with old Rosin to Beau. To drink with old Rosin to Beau. Sitting down the hogshead of whiskey, to drink with old Rosin to Beau. Get a half dozen stout fellows and let them all stagger in. Dig a great hole in that meadow, and in it put Rosin to Beau. And in it put Rosin to Beau. And in it put Rosin to Beau. Dig a great hole in that meadow, and in it put Rosin to Beau. Get ye a couple of balls, put one down me head and me toe. Diamond ring scratch all up on him, name of old Rosin to Beau. The name of old Rosin to Beau. Name of old Rosin to Beau. Diamond ring scratch all up on him, name of old Rosin to Beau. That old tyrant approaching, cruelly merciless old foe. I lift up my glass in his honor, take a drink with old Rosin to Beau. Take a drink with old Rosin to Beau. Take a drink with old Rosin to Beau. I lift up my glass in his honor, take a drink with old Rosin to Beau.
Or T.A., as he was more commonly known, was born in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania on April 15, 1857. To John Emery Snyder and his wife Frances Elizabeth. He was the eldest of 3 children and attended school just a short walk from the family home at the corner of 8th and Scott Streets. T.A. continued his education at Millersville State Normal School and graduated at the age of 16. After which he was promptly employed at Stroudsburg Grammar School. His career took off when at age 20 he was elected principal of Lehighton Public Schools. On December 22nd, 1879, T.A. married Emma Louise Houck, and their marriage produced 2 children, a son, Raymond John, and a daughter, Edith May. Although he enjoyed his work with the Lehighton schools, T.A.'s real passion was law, and after completing his studies, he was admitted into the Monroe County Bar Association at the age of 26. But T.A. missed the Lehighton scene and returned once more to the schools he loved. And in 1885, he became County Superintendent of Public Schools. At the age of 28, he was the youngest to hold that office in the entire state. He was twice re-elected to that office and served a total of 9 years. But once again, the call of the legal system drew T.A., and he opened a law office in 1893. T.A. and Emma Louise were well educated and passed that desire for learning on to their children. They also enjoyed travel, and in 1901 they visited the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. At that time, Buffalo was the 8th largest city in the United States. It hosted a World's Fair to promote harmony among the countries of the Western Hemisphere. Tragically, it was at this very exposition that the American President William McKinley was shot by an assassin on September 6, 1901, and died of his wounds 1 week later. The Snyders marveled at the fascinating exhibits and the myriad electric lights while strolling the grounds, and Emma Louise fell in love with the building that housed the exhibit of the state of Michigan. T.A. promised to purchase it for her, and the various buildings were dismantled, and T.A. fulfilled his promise at the completion of the exposition. With the aid of the Lehigh Valley Railroad, the Michigan State Building was transported to Lehighton, where it was reconstructed as Colonial Court, their residence at the corner of 7th and Iron Streets. Incidentally, T.A. also bought another building, the Expositions Pennsylvania building, and he had that shipped to Mauch Chunk, where it was later erected on top of Flagstaff Mountain. T.A. was by now well established in the Carbon County Bar, and with his brother-in-law, Charles Houck, he opened a law office in Lehighton. He became very active on many boards, including the Lehighton Savings and Loan, Enterprise Building and Loan, the Lehighton Electric Power Authority. He was proud to be a part of the Lehighton Land Development Association, and together with James Irwin Blakesley, he helped to bring trolley service to town. By 1907, T.A.'s health began to fail. Although barely 50 years old, he found himself unable to do the things that he enjoyed. Relaxing at his beloved deer preserve on Mahoning Mountain became a chore for him, and he realized that his life was nearing an end. On May 4th, 1907, T.A. prepared his last will and testament. On May 11th, he traveled by train to St. Luke's Hospital in Bethlehem, and here surgeons removed a cancerous growth from his liver. Although the procedure was successful, T.A.'s weakened condition was too much to support recovery, and on May 16, 1907, with his family at his bedside, T.A.'s life went out. Following his death, praise was heaped upon T.A. Snyder. He was eulogized as a progressive citizen who always worked for the betterment and advancement of the community. His wife, Emma, moved in with their daughter's family until her death in June of 1915. Unfortunately, Colonial Court did not survive. It had been rented, and in April of 1916, it burned to the ground in a blaze that could be seen for miles. Like her parents, T.A. and Emma Snyder, their daughter Edith died prematurely in 1922 at the age of 38 from influenza. Their son Raymond attended Lafayette College and served in World War I. He suffered the lingering effects of gassing in the trenches of Europe and spent the remainder of his life in VA hospitals until his death in San Francisco in September of 1949. Fortunately for us, the Pennsylvania building from the Buffalo Exposition that T.A. paid to be dismantled and shipped to Mauch Chunk remains today atop Flagstaff Mountain. It was known in its heyday as the Ballroom in the Clouds and hosted such famous personalities such as the Dorsey Brothers and their band. It is a reminder of a hard-working man who left a legacy of beauty and enjoyment for the community. So this is T.A. Snyder. And as you can see here, with Colonial Court behind there, that is Emma and horses. She obviously loved horses a lot, either to ride them or to be pulled by a carriage. Now, in Buffalo, I know this is hard to see, but this one right here where my finger is the Pennsylvania building, and there's a bigger photo of it. When you look at the flagstaff, it is not going to look like this. They took all the components and it actually sat up there for many years, and TA was long gone before they finally decided to build it. So the lumber and the glass, all the windows, that's all the components. Is it built exactly like that? No, but that came from Buffalo. The upper picture here is of the Michigan State Building as it sat at the exposition, and below here, it's in Lehighton Colonial Court, the home of TA and Emma Snyder. There is a couple that wanted to be here in the first way today. This is a picture of Edith in the front. She is the daughter of Emma, who is behind her brother Raymond over here, and Edith's daughter Louise here. Louise had a daughter. She is Barbara Stewie from Lockport, New York. She wanted to be here today. She's in her early 80s, and she wanted to hear the story of her great-grandparents. So I have promised her that we're recording it, and we're going to try to make sure that she gets to see it, because she really wanted to be here. She's a hit, let me tell you. So this is TA with one of his deer friends, and there's one of his deer. He had a deer pen on Mahoney Mountain, and so he would go visit his pets, but he liked to have his deer on Mahoney Mountain.
Talking about for today would be John Prine, one of my favorite musicians who was born in 1946 and unfortunately passed away last year of COVID, of all things. But there was a connection between John Prine and Stephen Foster. We'll be doing some of Stephen Foster's songs again later. But in 2004, John Prine recorded an album of Stephen Foster's songs called Beautiful Dreamer. And 2 years ago, before the Kentucky Derby, he recorded the song that is generally played before that, My Old Kentucky Home. Good night. He recorded that as a 7-inch album, and on the other side he recorded Paradise, a song from his first album in 1971. So both songs. So I'd like to do both of those. My Old Kentucky Home, which would have been Stephen Foster. Sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home. 'Tis summer and the workers are tired. The corn tops are ripe and the meadow is in bloom, while the birds are making music all the day. Weep no more, my lady, oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song of my old Kentucky home, for the old Kentucky home far away. The young folks roll on the little cabin floor, all merry and happy and bright. By and by, hard times come knocking at the door, then my old Kentucky home, good night. Weep no more, my lady, oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song of my old Kentucky home, for the old Kentucky home far away. Hunt no more for the possum and the coon on the meadow and the hill and the shore. They sing no more by the glimmer of the moon on the bench by that old cabin door. Weep no more, my lady, oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song of my old Kentucky home, for the old Kentucky home far away. For the old Kentucky home far away. So Paradise, I heard this among our circles, playing with different folks, and John Prine spent a lot of time in Kentucky looking at coal mining and strip mining and things that we have right here. I grew up in Nesquehoning, so when you go over the mountaintop, beautiful forest, and you would see ravages of strip mining, whatever it is. So when I saw this song, I thought, you know, I could kind of relate to this. When I was a child, my family would travel down to western Kentucky, where my parents were born. There's a backward old town, it's often remembered, so many times that my memory is home. Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River, Paradise Lake. I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal trains all the way. Then the coal company came with the world's largest shovel. They tortured the timber and stripped all the land. Picked up for their coal, but the land was forsaken, and they wrote it all down as the progress of man. Oh, Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River, Paradise Lake. But I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train is all the way. When I die, let my ashes float down the Green River. Let my soul roll on up to Rochester Dam. And I'll be halfway to heaven, paradise waiting just 5 miles away from wherever I am. Oh, Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River, Paradise Lake. But I'm sorry, my son, you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train is all day away.
A lot of you know that I love Christmas. I love to decorate for Christmas, and I have over 100 Christmas trees in my house at Christmas time. So why not make another one? These are all the strips of the fabric of different masks that I made through the entire pandemic. So this is my pandemic tree of all the material that I used to make masks. I do have to squeeze in just a little short story, and then Dave can do another song after that before we get to our other story. But this story here, there's a gentleman in California that sent me some emails in 2018, 2 years after we had our first cemetery walk. Notice how it took me until 2021 to figure out the story. There are pages and pages and pages of stuff in here from the newspapers from that time. And it took me that long to kind of get through it because I'm not a police officer, I'm not a detective, and I'm not a forensic person to where I put this all together. Did I get it all together? Maybe not. But I got enough points here. There are certain places, I usually have somebody edit my things. And if it makes you stop dead in your tracks, you go, So there is a couple things in here that make you go, So listen closely. The year is 1909. The month, February. The quiet town of Lehighton is rocked by the headlines of the evening leader, murder. Joseph Henry Koch, a veteran of the Civil War and a canal boatman, was found dead. And the newspapers took a stance, and they stuck to it. Let's take a look at some of the information surrounding this gruesome incident. John Schaefer was the proprietor of the Park Restaurant. He and Mrs. Walter Schaefer. There's our first big breaking point. John Schaefer and Mrs. Walter Schaefer. Who was she? Was she a sister-in-law? We're going to call her a sister-in-law for today. I have no idea what the relationship was. John Schaefer and his Sister-in-law, Mrs. Walter Schaefer, left the premises on Saturday afternoon to attend a party in Schuylkill County. Thank goodness for editing. You have no idea how much information they had about this party, who attended, where it was. We just said they attended a party in Schuylkill County. In their absence, William Hess was to conduct business. Mr. Hess was a single man who worked at the lumber yard in Packerton, and he usually asked Henry Koch, as Joseph was commonly not called, to help him manage the establishment. Shortly before midnight, Hess told his patrons to finish up as he was going to close. There were about 4 men in the place, and they all left in good order. It was time to turn in, and Koch went upstairs to his room while Hess went into a side room where he could sleep on the lounge in the event that landlord Schaefer returned during the night. The Schaefers, however, returned from Schuylkill County on Sunday afternoon. That was some party. Saturday afternoon to Sunday afternoon. That was a party. Mrs. Schaefer opened the rear door and fell headlong over the body of Henry Koch. Together they awakened Hess, who claimed that he slept like a log during the night and heard no noise or commotion. When they took him to witness Koch's corpse, he fell over in a dead faint. Now, Hess may have been in a deep sleep and heard nothing, but someone did. J.L. Helt, who owned the building, lived next door and slept in a room directly across from Koch's room. Sometime around 2 a.m., he claimed to have heard a quarreling and a voice cry out, "Son of a..." I'm in a mausoleum. You got that one. And then a thumping noise, such as might have been made by someone falling down a flight of steps. The police report showed that Koch was found at the bottom of a flight of stairs, lying on his back with one foot resting on the step. His head in a small pool of blood. Wounds were noted at the back of his head and a slanting 1.5-inch cut from left to right on the front. A fracture at the back of his skull, as well as a 2-inch abrasion on his left arm and a bruise on his lower back. All of these could have come from a fall or by being struck. The staircase leading upstairs was extremely narrow. A large, round parlor globe on the staircase, however, was intact. But another lamp on the table at the bottom of the stairs had a broken globe, and some of the pieces were under the dead man. I hope you're all taking notes, okay? Blood marks were found in 2 places on the carpet. A hammer was found at one point. It was even reported to have blood and hair on it. And when shown the hammer, the Schaefers said they had never seen it before. Mrs. Schaefer also stated that she had made up all the beds prior to leaving for Schuylkill County, and yet the room adjacent to Koch's had been occupied by someone. A size 13.5 collar. I'm looking at some of you. I've been told a 13.5 collar would go around a skeleton. It's a tiny little collar. A size 13.5 collar that looked as if it had been torn from a shirt was found there. A coat and hat were found on the bureau, and pants and boots were on the floor. Stories in the newspapers and around town were filled with speculation, do you think? Perhaps someone knew the Schaefers were out of town and they planned a robbery. Perhaps Henry Koch knew who it was, and he was killed on the principle that dead men tell no tales. Another theory was that Schaefer or Hess had an enemy who wanted them out of the way. And perhaps Koch just accidentally fell to his death through a misstep on the stairs. There was no end to this. The newspapers kept repeating, "Someone knows something." Who was it? The coroner swore in a jury for the inquest. All were respected men of the area, and at least 2 of the jurors were newspaper men. After the evidence had been presented, the verdict came back that Henry Koch came to his death at the hand of some person or persons unknown to the jury. The county detective then dismissed the case with a wave of his hand, as if to say, the case is not worthy of further investigation. The Lehighton press had something to say. We do not say that Boatman Koch was willfully murdered, but we do believe that he was kicked or pushed down the steps. It may be another case of unexpected holdup with an unexpected ending. The case warrants an investigation. We don't hope anybody is holding back for a liberal reward. The funeral of Joseph Henry Koch took place the Thursday following his death. Eventually, the police investigation deemed it an accidental death and not murder. Perhaps there would have been a different outcome had they all known one other tidbit of information. During the funeral, Koch's widow overheard two men arguing, and one reportedly said he was going to tell the widow what really happened. The other one threatened his well-being if he did. When she informed her family of what she heard, they wanted her to tell the authorities. But she said that the hell these men would endure here on earth, knowing what they did, and the fate awaiting them in eternity was punishment enough. The family down through the decades always claimed that Joseph Henry Koch had been murdered. This ordinary man, whose life had an extraordinary ending, is buried in an unmarked grave over on the Soldier's Plot.
This couldn't be a Songs and Stories without a murder battle. This song is recorded by many people. It's called Banks of the Ohio. Recorded in 1946 by Bill Monroe. Also recorded by Flat Scruggs. And it tells the story. In my first song, our guy that did the jig was Kemp, but his first name was Will. And our antagonist in this song is Willie. And Willie kind of asked his girlfriend to take a nice walk down by the river. And this is what happened. Ask my love, take a walk. Just a little way with me. As we walked, we would talk all about our wedding day. Darling, say you be mine in our home. Happy be down beside where the waters flow on the banks of the Ohio. Took her by a pretty white hand, led her down that bank of sand. I pushed her in where she would drown. What I saw as she floated down. Darling, say you be mine in our home. Happy be down beside where the waters flow on the banks of the Ohio. Turning home between 12 and 2, thinking, Lord, what deed have I done? I killed the girl I love, you see, because she would not marry me. Darling, say you be mine in our home. Happy be down beside where the waters flow on the banks of the Ohio. Very next day, about 4:30, chariot walked right at my door. Said, young man, don't you try to run. Pay for this
the Ohio. That's it.
Gentleman who is not buried on this cemetery, but because Joseph Henry Koch was a Civil War soldier, I just thought this appropriate. There are many ordinary people with extraordinary stories in Lehighton and in other communities near and far. Often it is good fortune or bad luck that conspires to turn routine circumstances into something much more memorable. This story is not about someone from the immediate area, but from one not too distant and worth relating. John Summerfield Staples was born in 1845 in Stroud Township in neighboring Monroe County. In 1862, barely his 17th birthday, he enlisted as a private in Company C of the 176th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry Regiment. He served until May of 1863, when he was medically discharged due to illness from typhoid fever, and he returned to the Stroudsburg area to recuperate. 1 year later, John traveled to Washington with his father to assist him in his work as a carpenter. It was here that the ordinary became memorable. During the Civil War, it was customary for a citizen who couldn't serve or chose not to serve to pay for a substitute to serve in the Army in his place. Although President Lincoln was exempt from serving in the Army, he felt obliged to find a willing substitute for him. John was approached by a representative of the President and asked if he would meet with Mr. Lincoln on October 1st, 1864. During that meeting, the President asked if John was willing to take his place in the Grand Army of the Republic. John Staples accepted, and President Lincoln formally selected him as his representative recruit and compensated him with $500, the equivalent of a year's wages. John was 19 years old when he was mustered in as a private in Company H of the 2nd District of Columbia Infantry Regiment. He saw little action over the next year and worked primarily as a clerk for the Provost General and as a prison guard. After he was mustered out, in September of 1865, John returned to Pennsylvania, where he died in 1888 and is buried in the Stroudsburg Cemetery. It was only at his death that this ordinary man, who never rose above private, received appropriate recognition for his unique contribution. This is a local story worth telling. Thank you.
As far as extraordinary musicians,
Elizabeth Libba Cotton, born 1893 and lived to 1987. And she was an American blues and folk musician. And she enjoyed playing the guitar and wasn't really taught. Developed her own style. And she developed a style of finger picking called, of course, cotton picking, where she played bass notes and also played the melody. That's some from her song Freight Train. And that's nice, that's okay, you can learn that, we could all learn that. But what makes her extraordinary was, she was untaught, but she was left-handed. And this is the part that I still can't figure out. She was left-handed, so she flipped the guitar around and played, upside down. And in most cases, Jimi Hendrix was left-handed, and then when he played this, the guitar was restrung. As it is now, the bass strings are close to me, and I play those with my thumb. Treble strings, melody strings are the top three. She flipped it around and she played and developed that kind of playing backwards. So she played the melody instead of having the bass strings with her thumb. She played the melody with her thumb and the bass notes with her fingers. So that's just extraordinary. That to me I still can't figure out. So I'm going to put that song, Freight Train, in another song that I like, and we're in Lehighton and we talk about trains and we're talking about hobos.
last week, and this is called The Dying Hobo. On an eastbound freight train, one cold December day, beneath an eastbound boxcar, that dying hobo lay. Comrade stood beside him, his hat was in his hand, for he knew that his old buddy was a-going to a distant land. Go tell my gal in Frisco, no longer will I roam. I've caught that eastbound freight train on my way back home. Freight train that runs so fast. Freight train, run so fast. Please don't tell what train I'm on. They won't know what route I'm going. When I'm dead and in my grave, no more good times here I'll crave. Lace the stones at my head and feet and tell them I've gone to sleep. When I die, oh bury me deep down at the end of Chestnut Street, so I can hear old number 9 as she comes rolling by. Freight train, run so fast. Freight train, now run so fast. Please don't tell what train I'm on. They won't know the route I'm going. I'm going to a better land where you don't have to change your socks, where the beer and the foam come trickling out of the rocks. Dying hobo closed his eyes as he drew his last breath. His comrade stole his coat and his hat and kept on heading west.
The other year we had a cemetery walk and it focused on teachers. So of course, I had a lot of teachers, I had a lot of my own stories, but I needed to know stories behind the teachers. 2 of those teachers were sisters, actually. 4 of them were sisters. You had the Geisel sisters and you had the Rosin sisters. But the Geisel sisters had a niece, Mary Ann Schaefer. So I asked her to give me some information on her aunts, Aunt Jenny and Aunt Anna. And as she did, she also told me about her parents. And I said, oh, Mary Ann, I have to do your parents sometime. That's an extraordinary story. So when I decided to do extraordinary stories of ordinary people, I asked her for some insights on her parents. Normally when I asked for story material, people give me a couple bullet points and I take from them and I make a little story. She gave me bullet points and then she gave me a story. I did not make this up. This is totally her story because I was absolutely blown away. These are the bullet points about Henry and Mary Geisel. Henry was born July 3rd, 1915 in Lehighton. His parents were George and Clara Geisel. George was Lehighton's blacksmith and he was instrumental in bringing public water into Lehighton. He was also an advocate on environmental issues. He was very much against the mining industry dumping waste into the Lehigh River. Obviously a man before his time. He was the youngest of 7 children, and he was the only son. He worked in his father's blacksmith shop until the age of 25, and he enjoyed woodworking, carving, writing, drawing, and painting. Mary Jean Louis Geisel was born March 24th, 1928 in Andover, England. Her parents were Elsie, who was English, and Alexander, who was Scottish Louis. She was an only child. Her father died when Mary was 18. Mary worked at Lloyd's Bank. She lived with her mother and her grandmother. She was an accomplished sewer and knitter, as knitting was a part of the school curriculum. She also enjoyed gardening. During the war, Mary's mother worked as an air raid warden, and the family had 2 young sisters who were evacuees from the bombings in London living with them. Henry entered the Army in 1940. He was a member of the 9th Infantry Division known as Old Reliables. He was in the 39th Anti-Tank Company. The company's slogan was, anything, anytime, anywhere, bar nothing. On their helmets was painted AAAO. His service was much in demand because he spoke fluent German. While stationed in Tunisia, Henry saw heavy fighting and also developed yellow fever, and so he was sent to a base in England to recover. From there, he went on to Sicily, where he developed severe poison ivy. And again, he was sent to England to recover at a base in Barton Stacey, England. When he recovered, he remained there to prepare for the Normandy invasion. While on leave one afternoon, Henry and an army buddy decided to walk to the nearby town of Andover. They came upon several young ladies wading in a stream, one of whom had a bloody nose. So Henry offered her a handkerchief. A conversation ensued, ending with an exchange of addresses. Henry liked writing letters. A few days later, Henry was on his way to France. Henry's company landed on Omaha Beach in Normandy on June 8, 1944, 2 days after D-Day. When France was secured, his division marched on to Germany into the Hurtgern Forest. He fought in the Battle of Bulge in Bastogne, Belgium, where extremely vicious fighting took place. Additional time was spent in various German and Belgian areas. As a respite from the fighting, Henry drew many cartoons depicting army life, which he gave to friends or sent to correspondents. During these times, he often wrote to Mary and included drawings for her. He also corresponded regularly with his parents. Henry arrived back in the United States in 1945, and he then composed his most meaningful letter to Mary, asking her to consider coming to the United States and marrying him. He knew this was asking a lot, as she would have to leave her mother and grandmother behind. Mary took some time to consider the proposal and finally agreed. She arrived in New York, in City Harbor, aboard the Queen Elizabeth on April 20th, 1948, at the age of 20. Now, first arriving in the United States, you have to understand, Henry never had a driver's license. So he took a bus to meet Mary in New York City. On the ride back, Henry was pointing out different things along the way that he thought may be of interest to Mary, commenting on the moment they entered Pennsylvania. And one of the first Pennsylvania sights to catch her eye was a huge barn with a sign that said, "Chew, mail, pouch, tobacco." She was confused. She asked what this meant, because chewing tobacco was not an English practice. She was thoroughly disgusted by the thought of this. Soon they entered coal country. Henry explained they were getting close to Lehighton. The scenery was bleak and grimy, with small shacks dotting the hills and a dismal pallor over everything. Having come from a small town with greenery and beautiful garden beds everywhere, Mary feared that this was what she'd have to live among. Homesickness was beginning. She began to cry. Henry consoled her, letting her know Lehighton was clean and green and she could have a garden. When the couple finally arrived at the Geisel home on 3rd Street, there was another shock waiting. An aunt in the family had recently died and the embalmed body was on view in the casket. It was a commonplace tradition at that time. Not in England, but here. Viewings were not generally practiced in England. The corpse, coupled with Henry's 6 sisters, parents, and a good number of Henry's other relatives, all of whom were total strangers to Mary, left her aghast and shaken. So much for being off to a good start. 4 days after arriving in Lehighton, the marriage took place May 2nd, 1948, at Trinity Lutheran Church in Lehighton. Shortly afterwards, the newlyweds left for Elkhart, Indiana, where Henry had enrolled in a dental technician school to learn how to make false teeth. They lived there for 1.5 years. They had a daughter, Jean, on June 20th, 1949, and then they returned to Lehighton. Henry built an addition to the family home on 3rd Street where they lived from then on. Their second daughter, Mary Ann, was born on January 31st, 1951. Henry never did pursue a job as a dental technician. However, he did make a set of false upper teeth for Mary, which fit perfectly over her own healthy teeth. However, the false ones were extremely buck, making her look quite ridiculous. Henry, while being a very quiet man, had a great sense of humor. It is the quiet ones who have a good sense of humor, isn't it? He also made a set of false upper teeth for each one of his daughters when they were infants, telling those that saw the babies that they were born with teeth. Henry worked as a carpenter and painter in Lehighton for many years. Walking to all his jobs, he transported his tools and supplies in his trusty wheelbarrow. He spent long hours in his shop building furniture, refinishing old furniture, and creating all sorts of wooden pieces. A son, Jeffrey, was born on April 14, 1961. All 3 children spent special times learning drawing techniques from their father, and Jeffrey spent time in the shop learning woodworking. Mary's grandmother died in the late 1950s, and her mother, Elsie, came to the United States in 1957 to be with her daughter and family. She did not want to be a burden, so she took a job as a housekeeper for a family friend, which she continued until his death in 1993. In 1966, a neighbor, Herman Salt, who worked as a campus policeman at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, told Henry of a job opening there in the maintenance department. Not only would it be a steadily paying job, but employees' children would, if accepted, receive tuition remission. Also, Herman would be Henry's transportation, as their work hours would be the same. Wanting the best for his family, Henry applied and was accepted. And he worked at Muhlenberg, enabling both his daughters to attend there. Son Jeffrey worked there with his dad during the summers of his high school years, but he did not attend college there as he went on to pursue a degree in industrial arts, which was not offered at Muhlenberg. In the summer of 1970, Henry, Mary, and their son took a 15-day tour of Europe with the veterans of the 9th Infantry Division. The trip was in observance of the 25th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe. They visited England, Belgium, France, the Netherlands, and Germany. It was the first and only time that Mary returned to her native England. Henry retired from Muhlenberg in 1980. He continued to work on wooden items in his backyard shop and to do odd jobs for friends in town. He had convinced Mary to get a driver's license, which she did, and they had purchased a Studebaker Lark from Hahn's garage. Being a white-knuckle driver, Mary never drove outside Lehighton's town limits, but she could take Henry to his handyman jobs in town. Looks like as the wheelbarrow got retired. Henry died in 1985 after a struggle with cancer. Mary and her mother, who had moved back with Henry and Mary in 1993, stayed in the family home taking care of Henry's sister Jenny until her passing. Mary began working at the Lehighton Memorial Library, a job she enjoyed and to which, unfortunately, she could walk. She didn't have to take the car. Mary fell ill with cancer and passed in 2002. Mary's mother lived to the age of 104, passing in 2008. So this is Henry and Mary. And this is Henry with some of his buddies in the forest in Germany. And this is one of his drawings of his time in the army. He actually wrote a poem to his parents, which was published in the paper when he sent it home. And this is Henry and Mary on their wedding day on the steps of Trinity Church. Trinity does not look like that anymore. They pulled that church down and rebuilt a new one. This is Henry and Mary. He had made all this Christmas stuff out of the woodworking, and she made all the clothes for the people. She's very good at that. This is a newspaper article on their trip over to Europe.
One more set. My last extraordinary musician is Pete Seeger. And Pete was a prolific songwriter, best known for his two songs that I'm going to do today, Where Have All the Flowers Gone, and the Hammer song, If I Had a Hammer. And let me say this. Just looking at this, it was published in 1955, and 1964 release went on to be inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. So. But anybody that was into folk music, as I was many, many years ago, Pete Seeger was very influential and all the way through. And beyond that, what really made him extraordinary to me, what made me choose him, was in doing the research for this, a few weeks ago I came across a YouTube picture of, he was at a concert. He lived to be 94. He died in 2014, was born in 1990. So when he was 93, he was performing at Farming in 2013. John Mellencamp brought him up on stage. And he could barely sing, but he had the spirit, and he was there. And I looked at that and thought, that's pretty cool. People that are 30 years younger saying, we can't do this, we can't do that. And there he was. He just never stopped. So here's Where Have All the Flowers Gone? Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the flowers gone? Young girls pick them, everyone.
everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Where have all the young men gone? Long time passing. Where have all the young men gone? Long time ago. Where have all the young men gone? God for soldiers, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the soldiers gone? Gone to graveyards, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Where have all the graveyards gone? Long time passing. Where have all the graveyards gone? Long time ago. Where have all the graveyards gone? Gone with flowers, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Yeah. The hammer song. I do have a hammer out here, but I don't know where it is. This is a song that I picked up and I learned, and it just makes this extraordinary. It's certain songs, those of you that play guitars, like, words are good. Some guys you'll talk to, I shouldn't even say this. Stop. The words are fine and this and that, but to me, what makes a song good is if it moves me, if I feel it, if I feel the song what it is. And when I started to play it, just have that feeling. I had a hammer in the morning, a hammer in the evening, all over this land. A hammer out of danger, a hammer out of warning, a hammer out of love, my brothers and my sisters, all over this land.
and to have a storyteller, a top-notch storyteller like Captain Mom right here.
So hopefully we will raise money from this. We will have another one in September. So look for it, tell your friends, tell them it's a toe tap